What's up, Dragon Brood? We're going to be taking a look at black cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and we're mostly going to be looking at the rares and mythics, and we're just going to be giving them our first blush response and just see how we feel about these cards and what we think we can do with them, mostly in standard, but maybe some other spots. But let's have fun and go look at some cards. On to the black card. I don't know, was this card on our pronunciation sheet? It was. So, oh, this is exactly how I would have pronounced it. Aquazot. Aquazot. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Okay, cool. I guess there's people, you found it Aquazot or something. Somebody might have done that. But yeah, Aquazot's Deepest Betrayal. It is a 5 mana, 4/4 legendary bat god. That's actually a random combination. A bat god. All right. Flying and lifelink. So not bad for 5 mana. When it attacks, each opponent discards a card. For each opponent who can't, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, create a 1/1 bat flying creature token. When this dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed as Temple of the Dead. It taps for a black. You can pay 3, transform Temple of the Dead, activate only if a player has 1 or fewer cards in hand. And yeah, this card's solid. Like, this is the type of card we've been wanting to play in various discard decks, right? Because you didn't really have an upper end. You were kind of just playing one of the Shieldrids or something, or one of the Planeswalkers like a Ashiok or whatever. I mean, I have a deck I was thinking about putting up soon, the next couple days. That's just going to be a discard deck. This is the type of card that would be great in there as your upper end, right? Because, one, it's just a sizable body. I mean, 4/4 flying, lifelink, great. If it connects, now your opponent has to discard an extra card. If you've already kept their hand low, well, then you're getting to draw a card. And then if for some reason this dies, it comes back as a thing that very likely is going to transform back to being a bat because your opponent's going to have 1 or fewer cards in hand. So yeah, I like this. This card's actually really, really sweet. I'm into it. I could see this being played a lot. Hello, Carlos. Welcome to the chat. We also have Delaney says, I like the sub theme in the set of finding lands in hands, graveyards, etc. only on meta theme. Yeah, they're doing a lot of interesting things with the set for sure. I think there's going to be a lot to build around in a lot of different ways than what we're doing right now. And that's always a bonus, right? We get to see more cards, more decks, more variety of strategies. Like, nothing to be upset at with that at all. Like, big fans of what this set is bringing to the table for sure. Bloodletter of Aquazots. So this goes with the other card, I assume. This is a weird cost. Colorless black for a vampire demon 2/4. Not excited to pay that for a 2/4 creature, so I hope this is a huge ability. If an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much. Okay, that's a good ability. They lose twice that much instead. If they would lose life during your turn. I mean, it is tough, right? It's 4 mana for a 2/4 flyer, which isn't great. It dies to a lot of stuff, especially if you're blocking. But man, your opponent losing twice that much life. That's big. I don't know how, like, I'm gonna lose to this card. like I don't know how. But anything that's making you lose twice as much life, like, and even crazier, like if there's 2 of these in play, you lose twice the first amount. And I'm assuming then the other one would trigger and your opponent already lost life, so then they would lose double that amount? No, they would both trigger at the same time. So if they lost 3, you would just lose 6 twice, I think. Either way, this card's crazy. This card's, like, this is the type of card you like to see, right? Because it's hard to cast, because it's 3 colored mana in the cost. So you can't just splash it easily. It's a somewhat fragile card because it doesn't deal a lot of damage itself. But 4 toughness is nothing to turn your nose up at, right? It can at least block some stuff. But if it sticks, you might kill your opponent on the next turn. You know what I mean? Like, if you have like a couple of burn spells and then you attack, your opponent could just be dead. Like, seriously. Like, this is a cool card. I don't know how much I'm gonna play it, but it's a type of card that once your opponent has it on the battlefield, you are automatically concerned if there's more than, say, like 1 or 2 cards in their hand. Like, this becomes a real problem. Like, I'm into it. I like this type of card. It's kind of a really low floor, but it has a really high ceiling, right? So it's a bit of a gamble to play it, but the payoff is going to be huge. Bringer of the Last Gift. 8 mana. So 6 black for a 6/6 flying vampire demon. Lots of demons in this set. When Bringer of the Last Gift enters a battlefield, if you cast it, so you can't just put it into play, each player sacrifices all other creatures they control. Then each player returns all creature cards from the graveyard that weren't. Oh, okay, so this is like a living death on a creature. Living death. All right. So it comes into play. All the current creatures go to the graveyard. Everything in the graveyard comes into play. Man, 8 mana for a 6/6, and it only works if you cast it. Like, I feel like there's some trick to this, but it feels like it takes a lot of work. A lot of work. I think any deck where you already are playing Living Death in commander type settings, you probably would play this as just like redundancy for that. Because we only have, I think, 3 or 4 cards in Magic that have this type or similar ability. So, I mean, you can play it for redundancy there. I don't think this is going to get played much, if ever, in 60 card formats, unless a creator, streamer, whatever, just building around it for the sake of making a deck. But as far as being a regular thing you see, probably not. Corpses of the Lost. 2 colorless and a black. Skeletons you control get +1/+0 and have haste. When this card enters a battlefield, create a 2/2 skeleton pirate. And at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, which is putting cards into your graveyard, you may pay 1 life. If you do, return this card to your hand. You can bounce this every turn effectively to get a 1. Like, I mean, this is all right. The problem here is, 1, I'd have to search and see how many other playable, like truly playable skeletons we have, first off, right? Or things that can turn stuff into skeletons. I think that would be my first start here with this card. But the problem is, the fact that you have to replay it every turn to effectively get a 3/2 with haste is okay, but not great, it doesn't feel like. Like, the fact that I have to, like, each time you bounce it, it's now susceptible to counters and other stuff or whatever too, right? So you're going to have to make some decisions where you just don't pay the life and it just stays in play. Which is why I'm saying, are there better skeletons we can really play? Because if not, then this is just all right. Like, now, if I'm on the side of playing some weird mid-rangey control, whatever, and then I have extra life and I'm just going to pay extra turn to make a zombie or a skeleton every turn, then like maybe that type of build probably works. But as an actual, like, the creature deck that wants to be doing this, probably not. For as much as people are going to want to put this into an aggressive type build with skeletons, I don't think that's what you're trying to do with this card. This doesn't read like those decks don't want to be casting the same card over and over just to get a 3/2. Okay, Preacher of the Schism. 3 mana, so 2 colorless and a black for a 2/4 vampire cleric with Death Touch. When the Preacher of the Schism attacks, the player with the most life or tied for the most life, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. When Preacher of the Schism attacks while you have the most life or are tied for the most life, you draw a card and lose a life. This is a very interesting card, right? Because it's a 2/4 with Death Touch. Your opponent doesn't necessarily want to block it to kill. Like, to kill this, they have to lose a significant size creature, right? Because it's a 2/4. Either that or they have to block with multiple things, which is kind of fine if they're willing to trade that. But if they have more life, you're either going to get a creature, or if you have more life, you're going to get to draw a card. Which is kind of always upside with this. I'm trying to like think of like what's the downside. If anything, it's really that this costs 3 and vampires are going to have a lot of quality cards to play in the 3 slot. So trying to figure out what's worth it. But if you are playing some type of life gain version of clerics or vampires for that matter, then it makes sense to go ahead and just play this in that slot because you're making more life linkers and you're finding ways to draw cards. So I kind of dig this card. It's not like stellar, but it's very interesting in the sense that it can make tokens and it can draw cards and it's Death Touch. So it's doing a lot for 3 mana. It's not like the most aggressive card, obviously, being a 2/4, but it's just good enough. The one balancing part about this card is it does have to put itself at risk for you to get either of those triggers, right? It's not whenever you attack. It's when this card particularly attacks. And that does give it a little bit of a downside. However, if you are attacking with other things that are threatening, your opponent's kind of forced, put to the test to decide, do they want to kill this and stop the extra value or kill the other thing that's going to kill them at the moment? So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how good this one ends up being because it's a very interesting card. I actually like where it's designed. I like what's going on with it, but we'll see if it's any good or not. I think it's definitely going to get some play, though. All right, we have Queen's Bay Paladin. 5 mana, so 3 black for a 5/4 Vampire Knight. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, return up to 1 target vampire card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. You lose life equal to its mana value. Yeah, this one's just good. We already play Reanimator spells if you're playing those type of decks for 4 or 5 mana. The downside here is, though, it does have to particularly get a vampire, so you can't just get any creature. But there are a fair amount of vampires still available because of all the stuff from Crimson Vow and whatever, right? So, Innistrad, that's what I was thinking. So yeah, this gives you an option to just get creatures back. And it's not even to your hand, it's to the battlefield. And that triggers every time this enters battlefield or attacks. So if your opponent doesn't deal with it immediately, there's a real shot you're just going to be getting multiple things back. And remember, there's even stuff like Blood Tithe Harvester and whatever that are removal cards that happen to also be vampires. So this could go into a few different vampire decks and actually be pretty slick overall. Like 5 mana is pricey for a lot of aggressive decks, but that's not bad. We are playing things that cost 4 and 5 right now in a lot of those builds, so it's not that big a deal. And just the overall value is really good. Now, admittedly, it comes into play with a finality counter, so you only get them once, but that's fine. Like, it's all upside value. It's a 5 mana 5/4, which is just meh, but almost always, barring your graveyard having been removed, going to result in at least one other creature coming back. And notice there's no restriction on the size of the creature. So if you just discarded another big creature, or heck, there could be another paladin in the graveyard, right? So you just paladin to get a paladin, and then that paladin brings something back. So like that could be a thing even. So yeah, cool stuff with this card. This one I'm digging. It's very interesting, very different, but I do like that the restriction is hard on getting a vampire creature specifically. So that way you do have to build around it a little bit. Souls of the Lost. This is a creepy looking card. What is even going on with that art? Like some tribal mass with like magic stuff coming out of them, like glyphs or something. Colorless and a black for a spirit creature. Then, in addition to casting the spell, you discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Souls of the Lost has power equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So it is a spirit. I don't know how relevant that is. It's only 2 mana, which is kind of nice. You can discard a card. You could discard a card to make sure it has some power and toughness. But playing it early, it's only going to be like a 1/2. This is the card that wants to be in a Descend deck, right? If somebody's building around that mechanic and you're constantly putting a bunch of stuff in the yard, you're self-milling, doing all that, this is exactly where this card wants to be. Like the self-mill type decks want this type of card. Like, playing this and then on the next turn having this card be a 3/4 or something for 2 mana is kind of sweet. And then it just gets bigger as the game goes on. So like, all right, like it's a neat card, but in a very specific type of deck, right? Only maybe even a handful of decks are even going to consider playing this card. The ones that will play it will probably like the card, but beyond that, I don't know. So this is a weird one where if you're playing the type of deck it works for, you're going to love having this card in your deck. But it's not one that if you're building some type of Golgari aggro or mid-range or, mono black aggro or whatever, you're not looking at this card. It's just not what you're looking to do. Stalactite Stalker. That is a cool name. It's a 1/1 for 1. All right. It's a Goblin Rogue. Menace. Not bad. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on the Stalker. You can pay 3, sacrifice the Stalker. Target creature gets -X/-X. Kill in a turn where X is this card's power. You know what? I kind of like this card. Like, okay, so first off, we don't have a lot of good 1 mana early creatures for black right now. It's kind of like, what is it, Evolve Sleeper? And I think that's it. There's really not much that we're playing. This also is a goblin. So then there already are some Goblin things going around, so that's an option. It has Menace, so it's hard to block. This is pretty cool. Probably is going to be fairly easy to get a 1/1 counter on this, at least every other turn or so, if not every turn, depending. Doesn't have to be used as a sorcery, thankfully. You can instant speed use this to kill something, possibly. Which could trigger another Stalker if you have one in play. So yeah, this card's good. This card's good. Stalactite Stalker. Cool name. I'm into this. I think this is a neat card. I'm giving this one a thumbs up. We have Starving Revenant. 2 colorless black for a 4/4 spirit horror. When Starving Revenant enters the battlefield, surveil 2. Then for each card you put on top of your library, you draw a card and you lose 3 life. Oh, interesting. So if you like the cards enough, you get them right then, but then you lose 3 life. And then if you have 8 cards in your graveyard, or 8 permanents, I think it is, in your graveyard, whenever you draw a card, if there are 8 or more permanents in your graveyard, well, there you go. Target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Interesting. So part of it is it kind of wants to surveil and have you put cards in the graveyard so you can get to the 8. So then the next time you draw, your opponent's losing and you're gaining. But even if not, you can just get cards immediately and lose 3 life. Oh, this is such a weird card, but I kind of like it. Like, because it is a 4/4 for 4, so already reasonable for the size. But there are a few decks where this might just fit, right? You could be doing the Descend type stuff. You could be doing self-mill stuff. You could be... Actually, this might even go into the draw 2 type decks, right? Because now you're also draining your opponent for an additional point of life, potentially. Or, whenever it just comes into play, you'll get to draw anyway for the cost of 3 life, but you'll be gaining life from some of your other cards, so you don't really care. So yeah, this might be a cool piece for the draw 2 deck, honestly. This card's pretty sweet. I like this card. I'm into this. I mean, Atheist God Dragon says, good with Rowan. Probably. The problem is Rowan herself just ain't spectacular. That's the problem. Because, like, even if you play this after playing Rowan and you get your cards, like, you lost life, but how much extra mana do you have left, right? You played Rowan the turn before, you play this the turn after. You don't even have mana left over to get that discounted cost. So, I mean, I built a deck with Rowan, and I'll probably go back to that at some point and experiment with cards like this, but I don't know what the impact is I would expect, realistically. Would I throw... Oh, wait. Says, would I throw this into... Oh, probably throw this into your Golgari Titania deck. Maybe. I mean, that's a place it could work. I mean, it at least fits. I mean, putting stuff in the graveyard, so it's all good. We have Tarian's Journal. Colorless and a black. Legendary artifact. Tap, sacrifice another artifact or creature. Draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. Tap it and pay 2, discard your hand, and you transform it. Oh boy, what's the backside? Taps for a black, or you can cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield with a finality counter on it, and is a vampire in addition to its other types. So you can sacrifice something to draw a card, or you can discard your hand and then play stuff out of the graveyard. Here's the problem with this card, though. Is again, we just have a lot of stuff that exiles things. Exiles things in play, exiles things from your graveyard. So there's a realistic chance there's not even anything in your graveyard to use with the card, right? Or there could be, but just not a lot of options. Being able to sacrifice something to draw a card seems cool, but it's limited to a sorcery. So you can't even respond. Like, if it was instant speed, that would be great, because then you could either choose to use it during your opponent's end step, or when they go to kill one of your creatures, or you want to respond to a sweeper. That would be cool. So the card does have some limitations on it. And we have that green card, something tree, that you can play stuff from the graveyard already, but that every deck I've put that in, it ends up being one of the first cards cut. So if that lets me play anything effectively from the graveyard, and I'm not really excited about that, I'm not totally sure how I feel about a card that's just letting me play creatures out of the graveyard. I don't know. Like, it reads really cool. I just don't know how good it really is. Terror Tide. 2 colorless, black. all creatures get -X/-X, where X is a number of permanent. Like, again, another sweeper. Why? So we have 2 already in this set, and we're not even through, what, 3 colors. Like, I'm not, again, not excited. We need to take a set off from sweepers. Seriously. We are going to have 12 sets in standard at some point, and there are going to be 2+ sweepers from every one of those sets available in standard. Practically every color has them in some variety doing something. We do not need any more right now. Like, we could literally take the next 3 sets off from playing sweepers, and we will still have over 20 sweepers available in standard for the next rotation. Like, we don't need this in our life. I have nothing. Like, is the card playable? Is it a quality sweeper? Yes, it will probably get some play. There's several decks that could use this. But that's about all I can say about it. It's another sweeper. Like, all right, it does its thing. That's going to do it for this video, but if you want to check out more cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, check out one of these next videos. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll catch you next time.